Paris, February 2026. The cameras are already rolling before he even steps out of the car. And for one long second, nobody says a word, because the man walking toward them looks different. Fuller face, longer hair, a calm, unreadable smile. Within minutes, the internet is on fire. Is that really him? What happened to his face? Why has he been gone for so long? This is Jim Carrey. The man who once made the entire world laugh just by moving his face. The actor who could not sit still, who could not stop performing, now living a life so quiet that a single red carpet appearance can break the internet overnight. 4 years earlier, he said something that shocked all of Hollywood. He was done, finished, ready to walk away from the industry that made him one of the biggest stars alive. Then he came back. Then he disappeared again. So what really happened to Jim Carrey? Why did the man who once couldn't stop performing suddenly go silent? And what is he actually planning next? This is not a scandal. It is not a collapse. It's something stranger and far more human. A story about fame, exhaustion, grief, and a man quietly deciding what the rest of his life is going to look like. But to understand where he's going, you have to understand how far he climbed first. Before the fame, there was almost nothing. Jim Carrey grew up poor, in a Canadian family that fell apart financially almost overnight. His father lost his job when Jim was still a teenager, and for a while the family lived out of a van, then camped out in a relative's backyard, taking factory shifts just to survive. Jim worked an 8-hour shift on the very same assembly line as his father and sister before he'd even finished high school. It's the kind of beginning that breaks people. Instead, it built something in him, a hunger, a strange, defiant sense of humor that refused to die no matter how bad things got. He started performing as a teenager, dragging his nervous energy onto tiny stages in Toronto. He bombed, constantly, but something about him was impossible to look away from. By his 20s, he'd moved to Los Angeles, chasing a bigger stage, and for years almost nothing happened. He was broke, unknown, running out of time in an industry that swallows hopeful young comedians whole. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the early 90s, Jim landed a spot on a sketch comedy show and audiences had never seen anything like him. Then the movie offers came, and when they hit hard. Within a few short years, Jim Carrey wasn't just famous, he was one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. He became the first actor in history to command a staggering $20 million paycheck for a single film. To the outside world, he had everything. But then slowly, quietly, Jim Carrey started doing something nobody expected from a comedy superstar. He began chasing dark, emotionally heavy roles. Stories about identity, illusion, loneliness, the thin line between performance and reality. Almost like he was trying to tell everyone something. And looking back now, it's hard not to wonder if he was already hinting at a truth he wasn't ready to say out loud. Because behind the wild characters and the box office records, something inside Jim Carrey was quietly shifting. For years, he gave interviews that seemed, on the surface, like classic Hollywood eccentricity. But if you listen closely, they weren't jokes at all. He spoke openly again and again about depression, not in some vague, distant way, directly. Admitting that even at the height of his fame, even while millions of people were laughing at his movies, he was fighting something dark inside himself. That alone was shocking. This was a man whose entire career was built on making people happy. And here he was, telling the world that happiness wasn't something fame could actually buy. He talked about relying on medication at one point in his life, then walking away from it, searching instead for peace through diet, exercise, and what he called a spiritual search. He described feeling like there were two versions of him, the electric, larger-than-life performer the world demanded, and a quieter, more fragile man underneath. But almost nobody understood at the time just how personal that struggle really was, because Jim Carrey wasn't just picking interesting scripts. He was quietly trying to figure out how to survive being Jim Carrey, and soon life was about to test him in a way no amount of fame could prepare him for. In 2015, tragedy struck. Catriona White, a woman he had been in a relationship with, died. The loss devastated him. In the years that followed, he rarely spoke about it publicly, and when he did, the pain was still raw. It's one thing to battle depression while the whole world is cheering for you. It's another thing entirely to carry devastating personal loss while still being expected to smile for cameras, promote movies, and perform on demand. Something in Jim Carrey changed after that. He pulled back from the relentless pace of Hollywood. The gaps between his projects grew longer. He leaned harder into painting, turning to canvas and color to process what words couldn't reach. His interviews grew stranger, more philosophical, almost cryptic. He'd say things like there was no fixed version of him, that identity itself was something people built out of fear. To some, it sounded like wisdom. To others, it sounded like a man quietly unraveling in public, but nobody expected what came next. In 2020, at the height of a tense election season, Jim Carrey stepped back into the spotlight in a way nobody saw coming, playing a real public figure on live television, week after week. For a moment, it looked like the old Jim Carrey was back, but behind the scenes, something else was happening. He wasn't chasing the spotlight again, he was quietly preparing to leave it for good. Then in April 2022, Jim Carrey said the words that shook Hollywood to its core. He wasn't hinting, he wasn't joking, he said it plainly, he was retiring. "I'm being fairly serious," he told a reporter. For an industry built on comeback stories and calculated career moves, this felt different. This was a man in his 60s, standing at the absolute peak of a decades-long career, saying he'd simply had enough. He said he'd done enough. That after nearly 50 years of performing, entertaining, pouring himself into other people's stories, he wanted something for himself. Peace, quiet. A life that wasn't dictated by scripts and press tour. Fans who had grown up on his movies felt like they were losing a piece of their own childhood. And just as everyone was adjusting to a world without new Jim Carrey movies, he came back. In 2024, he stepped back in front of the cameras for a major franchise role, as if the retirement had never happened. When asked about the contradiction, his answer was somehow both funny and painfully honest. He admitted, half-joking, that he'd spent a lot of money and needed some of it back. Classic Jim Carrey. Using humor to deflect from something heavier underneath. Because the truth was more complicated than a simple retirement or a simple comeback. He wasn't rejecting acting. He was rejecting the old version of fame, the version that had nearly broken him. By 2025, the picture had become clear, even if the public was slow to see it. He wasn't gone. He was choosing for the first time in his adult life exactly when and how the world got to see him. That November, he stepped back into the spotlight one more time, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a recognition of a cultural impact that went far beyond comedy alone. Then, in February 2026, came the moment that reignited the entire conversation. His appearance in Paris, accepting an honorary award for a lifetime of work. Giving an emotional speech, tracing his family's roots back 300 years to France, paying tribute to the father who taught him how to find laughter even in hardship. But it was his changed appearance that dominated every headline. Photos spread instantly, with fans calling him almost unrecognizable, fueling wave after wave of speculation. Neither Carrey nor his team has directly addressed the rumors, and the organizers of the event dismissed it all as a non-issue, choosing instead to honor his career. But the reaction revealed something far bigger than Jim Carrey. A star who once seemed frozen in time, forever young, forever manic, had simply aged, had simply lived. And the world wasn't ready for it, because here's the part almost nobody expected. Jim Carrey wasn't hiding out of shame or decline. He had built quietly and deliberately a life on his own terms. One built around family, art, reflection, and appearances only when they truly meant something to him. The wild comedic force who once seemed incapable of sitting still had become something else entirely. A man choosing stillness on purpose. Today, Jim Carrey isn't chasing box office records or headline-grabbing comebacks. He paints, he writes. He shows up occasionally when something genuinely calls to him, not because the industry demands it. The man who once needed the world's laughter to feel whole has spent years learning to find that peace from somewhere else entirely. This isn't a tragedy, and it isn't a disappearance. It's a quiet, ongoing redefinition of what a legendary career is allowed to look like, once the person living it decides fame was never really the point. Whatever Jim Carrey does next, one thing is certain: he'll do it entirely on his own terms. So tell me, what do you think really changed for Jim Carrey? Was walking away from Hollywood the smartest decision of his career, or is there more to this story we still don't know? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think he'll ever return to acting full-time, or has he found something better than fame? And if this story pulled you in, subscribe for more real Hollywood stories. The rise, the struggles, and the truth behind the headlines you think you already know.